Was Edward the Confessor a weak, vacillating man, dominated by his earls, handicapped from the start by a kingdom divided and threatened from all sides? Was he a clever, manipulative king who knew when to apply pressure, with whom to make deals, and ultimately made astute decisions for the benefit of all of England? Or does the answer lie somewhere else? It's up to you to come to your own judgments on Edward, and this podcast is designed to make you consider just some of the key events from Edward's life as you reach your ultimate judgment of the man. First, let us consider how he dealt with his earls. There were a number of significant earls during the reign of Edward. In Northumbria there was first SIWARD, then TOSTIG, and finally Morcar. In Mercia there was Leofric, then briefly Elfgar, before finally Edwin, brother of Morcar. And in Wessex there was Earl Godwin, followed by his son Harold Godwinson. But how did he deal with them? We'll start with the crisis of 1051. Edward successfully forced a troublesome earl and his family into exile, but then failed to maintain the support of SIWARD and Leofric, which meant that Godwin was able to return. Though a crisis, the period of 1051-52 never ended in civil war. Does this episode show Edward was wise in his dealing with his earls? Unwise? Lucky to avoid war? Ruthless? Weak-willed? Vacillating? That is up to you to consider and make up your own mind. When he first became king, Edward made SWEYN Godwinson and Harold Godwinson earls, and he married Edith, their sister. Was this a ridiculous decision, handing yet more power to Earl Godwin and his family? Or was this a wise decision from a man who lived abroad for 24 years and who recognised that he needed the alliance of a powerful family? Perhaps you could argue that Edward didn't even have a choice, so it was neither a wise nor a poor decision, as he had no decision to make, but it does highlight his weaknesses as a king. Again, it's up to you to decide. In 1054, Edward sent Earl SIWARD to place Malcolm on the throne of Scotland, with a Northumbrian army defeating the Scottish army of Macbeth. Was this a clever use of an experienced warrior, used to attempt to place an ally on the Scottish throne? Or does it show where the power in the kingdom really lay, i.e. in the hands of the earls? He also used Harold and Tostig Godwinson to crush Welsh rebellions. Again, those same questions arise. Next, we should consider Edward's foreign policies. In 1051, he elected to name Robert of Jumièges, a foreign magnate, as Archbishop of Canterbury, the foremost ecclesiastical position in the country. He did this against the wishes of Earl Godwin, and against the wishes of the monks of Canterbury. Does this show the strong will of a determined king, astutely trying to build links with mainland Europe that will serve as an advantage to England? Or was it a folly, done simply to irritate Earl Godwin? Perhaps, by promoting a foreigner over an Englishman, Edward started the process which ended in Leofric and SIWARD's lack of support in 1052. Or perhaps, by appointing him, Edward was being clever to put an ally in such an important position. It's up to you to decide. Edward donated some Sussex ports to the Norman Abbey of FECAMP. Was this yet another example of Edward favouring his friends across the Channel at the expense of his own subjects? Or was it an astute decision that was sure to generate trade with mainland Europe and further strengthen the English economy? Sources suggest, but cannot agree for certain, that Edward promised William of Normandy the throne of England during the crisis of 1051-52. To some this might be seen as intelligent political manoeuvring, securing a powerful ally to help him face down the Godwins, in addition to decreasing the likelihood of a Norman invasion during Edward's reign, and allowing him to focus his resources in other areas. To others, this appears a spiteful promise, done in an attempt to remove all chance of a Godwin heir to the throne, and a selfish move at that, which would leave England safe during Edward's reign, but primed for catastrophe after Edward's death, which we know came in 1066. The last aspect, which will be discussed in this podcast, will be Edward and his economy. Now do remember that there are many other aspects that we could look at, and we just happen to be looking at these three today. With regards to his economy, was Edward lucky? Was he perceptive? Was he shrewd? Edward's centralised coinage system meant that he was able to create an efficient currency that subsequently made it easier for Edward to collect tax. He had mints across the country that paid for the privilege of making the new coins, and for the privilege of distributing them to the subjects of the kingdom, again bringing money to the crown. The fact that Edward was able to change the coinage system 11 times has been pointed to by historians such as Frank Barlow as evidence of Edward's unusual command of the economy for this period of early medieval history. It's also true that there is no evidence of any significant rebellion against Edward, which is entirely the opposite to the situation faced by King William I, who surely had to deal with several serious rebellions, largely due to his avaricious tendency to tax his subjects heavily. The fact that Edward faced no rebellions suggests that Edward was fair with his levels of taxation. Frank Barlow also said that Edward did nothing to hinder trade and allowed some privileges which encouraged it. Around 1050-51, Edward stopped paying for his mercenary Viking navy that he'd paid for to guard against attack from Magnus of Norway. With Magnus dead in 1047, Edward, by 1050, must have felt safe enough to disband this aspect of his navy, and thus saved unnecessary expense for his country. We have looked at just 3 of the many potential aspects of the reign of Edward the Confessor. Every aspect of his reign is open to interpretation. Those with a keen mind will have noticed that there are overlaps, and you can link between the different aspects. For example, Edward's foreign policies had an impact on his economy. See the Norman Abbey of FECAMP and Sussex ports. And his foreign policies had an impact on his relationship with his earls. See Godwin's exile after Robert of Jumiege's appointment as Archbishop. And in addition, you might consider Eustace of Boulogn's demand for retribution in Dover. Edward might have been a weak king, or he might have been a successful king, or he might have been somewhere in the middle. Perhaps he was better with the economy than he was with the military, or perhaps he was good at dealing with some earls but not others. We all have an opinion, and it's okay for that opinion to change. I, for one, change my thoughts on Edward on a regular basis. One thing remains, though. Whatever your judgments on the aspects of his reign, you must have sufficient and impressive knowledge to support those judgments. Good luck.